The rain never ceased on Vaskthal. It drummed against the crystalline windows of the palace with the persistence of time itself, each droplet carrying the weight of an empire's slow decay. General Kyle Voran stood at the edge of the throne room's vast balcony, his six-fingered hands clasped behind his back, watching the water cascade down the towering spires that housed the military academies. From this height, the cadets looked like insects, scurrying between the ornate buildings, their movements precise but meaningless, a choreographed dance that bore no resemblance to the brutal reality of warfare. Voran's exoskeleton, a deep emerald that had once gleamed with pride, now bore the scars of too many battles and too many failures. His compound eyes, capable of tracking a dozen targets, simultaneously focused on nothing but the endless rain. The massacre of Kellen Prime still haunted his dreams, an entire world reduced to ash, because he had trusted in ceremony, over strategy, in tradition, over adaptation. 3 million souls and all, because he had been too proud to acknowledge that the old ways were failing. The Empire of Vaskthal had once stretched across 47 star systems, its insectoid armies feared throughout the galaxy. But that was before the border worlds began their slow rebellion, before the military academies prioritized etiquette over effectiveness, before generals like Voran learned to value appearances over results. Now, the Empire's greatest warriors could execute a perfect ceremonial sword dance, but couldn't hold a front line against determined insurgents. Behind him, the throne room buzzed with the nervous energy of 100 courtiers, their iridescent wings creating a symphony of anxiety. They spoke in hushed tones about the latest reports from the outer systems. 3 more worlds had declared independence, their governors slaughtered by rebels who seemed to materialize from shadow itself. The court's response had been predictable: another committee to study the situation, another ceremonial review of ancient military texts, another delay while the empire crumbled. General Voran. The voice cut through the chittering like a blade through silk. Every conversation ceased. Every wing fell still. The alien queen Vaskthal rose from her throne, her massive form casting shadows across the assembled nobles. She stood nearly 8 feet tall, her carapace a midnight black that seemed to absorb light itself. 4 arms extended from her torso, each ending in claws that could rend steel, while her mandibles clicked with barely contained fury. Voran turned slowly, his movements deliberately controlled. "Your Majesty." "Approach!" The word was both command and threat. The sea of courtiers parted before him, their compound eyes reflecting the bioluminescent strips that lined the throne room walls. Voran's footsteps echoed in the sudden silence, each one a countdown to judgment. He had served this queen for 37 years, had won her dozens of victories in the early days of his career. But he knew that past glories meant nothing to a monarch watching her empire dissolve. He stopped at the prescribed distance and performed the ritual genuflection, lowering his head until his antennae nearly touched the polished floor. "How may I serve you, Your Majesty?" "By succeeding where all others have failed." The queen's voice carried the weight of absolute authority. "The rebellion grows stronger with each passing day. Our forces are scattered, demoralized, leaderless. The insurgents have united under some phantom commander who strikes like lightning and vanishes like smoke. They mock our traditions, ignore our protocols, fight like the savages they are." Voran remained motionless, waiting. He could feel the collective gaze of the court boring into him, could sense their anticipation of his downfall. Many of them blamed him for the Empire's recent losses, conveniently forgetting that their own sons and daughters had proven equally incompetent when tested in actual combat. "You will bring me an army, General Voran." The Queen continued, her voice rising to fill every corner of the vast chamber. "A force capable of crushing this rebellion once and for all. You have 2 weeks to raise this army and destroy the insurgent stronghold on Garkid 7. Succeed and reclaim your honor. Fail." She let the word hang in the air like a death sentence. The implications were clear. Failure meant execution probably preceded by the ritual removal of his carapace while he still lived. It was the traditional fate of generals who disappointed their sovereign, a practice that had served to motivate military leaders for centuries. Unfortunately, it had also served to eliminate most of the empire's competent commanders, leaving only those skilled in survival rather than warfare. 2 weeks, Your Majesty. Voran kept his voice steady, but his mind was racing. It typically took months to properly raise and train a military force capable of taking a fortified position. The rebel stronghold on Garkad 7th was built into the side of a mountain protected by both natural barriers and sophisticated defensive systems. A frontal assault would require at least 10,000 troops, extensive artillery support, and careful coordination between multiple units. May I inquire as to the size of force you envision? The Queen's mandibles clicked in what might have been amusement. Large enough to win, General. The details are yours to determine. But understand this, the rebels have made a mockery of our military for the last time. I want their leaders brought before me in chains, their stronghold reduced to rubble, their movement crushed so thoroughly that the very memory of resistance dies with them. Of course, Your Majesty. I shall begin immediately. See that you do. The Queen settled back onto her throne, her 4 arms folding in a gesture of dismissal. Captain Solon will provide you with the latest intelligence reports. Use whatever resources you require, but remember 2 weeks, not a day more. Voran performed another ritual bow and withdrew from the throne room, acutely aware of the whispers that followed in his wake. The courtiers were already calculating the odds of his success, no doubt placing wagers on whether he would return at all. He had been the Queen's favorite once before Kalen Prime, before the long string of tactical defeats that had reduced the Empire's military to its current sorry state. Captain Mira Solon was waiting for him in the corridor outside the throne room, her own exoskeleton bearing the deep blue coloration of the intelligence branch. She was young for her rank, promoted on merit rather than birthright, a rarity in the current military structure. Her compound eyes tracked his approach with the intensity of a predator evaluating prey. "General," she said, falling into step beside him as they walked toward his command center. "I've prepared the intelligence briefings you requested." 2 weeks, Captain, Voran said without preamble. 2 weeks to raise an army and take Garkad 7th. What are our resources? Solon's antennae twitched the equivalent of a human grimace. "Limited, sir. The 3rd Fleet is committed to the Outer Rim Patrol. The 5th and 7th Legions are still rebuilding after the disaster at Korvac Station. The Academy training battalions are—" She paused, diplomatically. "Useless in actual combat," Voran finished. "Yes, I'm aware. What about mercenary units, private military contractors? Most of the reliable ones are already under contract to the Outer World governors. The ones available are either prohibitively expensive or of questionable loyalty." Solon activated a holographic display that materialized between them as they walked. "However, there have been some interesting reports from the frontier systems." The hologram showed a 3-dimensional star map with various systems highlighted in different colors. Red indicated active rebellion, yellow showed systems of questionable loyalty, and blue marked those still firmly under Imperial control. The pattern was disturbingly clear. The red zones were expanding while the blue shrank with each passing month. "What sort of reports?" Voran asked, though he suspected he already knew. Frontier systems were notorious for their tall tales and exaggerated accounts of local events. Stories of a lone human mercenary operating in the contested zones. Nothing confirmed, but the pattern is consistent across multiple systems. A single individual, apparently human, appearing wherever Imperial forces are most threatened. Sometimes fighting for the Empire, sometimes for the highest bidder, sometimes for reasons known only to himself. Voran stopped walking. "A human in our territory. It seems unlikely, I know. But the reports are remarkably consistent. A tall male, approximately 2 meters in height, skilled in both hand-to-hand combat and advanced weaponry. He appears to have military training, possibly special forces background. The locals have started calling him Ghostwalker because of his ability to appear and disappear without warning. They had reached Voran's command center, a circular chamber lined with tactical displays and communication equipment. The general settled into his command chair, his mind working through possibilities. Humans were rare in this part of the galaxy. Most of their species was concentrated in the core worlds, thousands of light years away. But if the reports were accurate, if there really was a human operative in the frontier systems, "Show me everything," he said. For the next 3 hours, Solon presented a detailed analysis of the mysterious human's activities. The pattern that emerged was fascinating and disturbing in equal measure. The individual in question was clearly a professional soldier, someone with extensive combat experience and tactical training. His methods were unorthodox by Imperial standards. He favored stealth and mobility over frontal assault, preferred small unit tactics to large formation battles, and showed a remarkable ability to adapt to changing circumstances. Most intriguingly, he seemed to operate according to some personal code of conduct. He had been known to refuse contracts that involved targeting civilians, had more than once turned against employers who violated agreed-upon terms, and had developed a reputation for keeping his word, even when it proved disadvantageous. "Where is he now?" Voran asked. "Unknown, sir. The last confirmed sighting was 3 days ago on Terminus Station, a trading post in the Kef Nebula. He was seen entering the Broken Antenna, a tavern known for catering to mercenaries and smugglers." Voran studied the tactical display, his mind forming the outline of a desperate plan. One human against a mountain fortress seemed like suicide. But then again, everything about this mission was suicidal. Perhaps that was exactly what made it perfect. "Prepare my ship," he said finally. "I'm going to Terminus Station." "Sir," Solon's voice carried a note of alarm. "Surely you don't intend to recruit a single mercenary to take the place of an entire army?" "The Queen demanded an army capable of taking Garkid 7th. Voran replied, his mandibles clicking in what might have been amusement. "She didn't specify that it had to be a large army." The journey to Terminus Station took 18 hours, during which Voran had plenty of time to consider the madness of his plan. Bringing a single human to replace an army was beyond desperate, it was potentially treasonous. But conventional tactics had failed repeatedly against the rebels, and conventional forces were simply not available. If the reports about this Ghostwalker were even partially accurate, he might represent exactly the kind of unconventional solution the situation required. Terminus Station orbited a dead planet in the heart of the Kef Nebula, its battered hull showing the accumulated damage of decades in space. It served as a neutral meeting ground for traders, smugglers, and mercenaries from across the galaxy, a place where imperial law held little sway and survival depended on reputation and firepower. The perfect place for someone like the Ghostwalker to operate. Voran docked his ship and made his way through the station's crowded corridors, his imperial uniform drawing suspicious glances from the diverse collection of beings that called Terminus home. He had traded his ceremonial armor for a simple combat variant, but there was no mistaking his military bearing or his species' distinctive appearance. The Broken Antenna occupied a prime location on the station's main level, its entrance marked by a flickering neon sign that had seen better centuries. The interior was exactly what Voran had expected, dim lighting, thick smoke, and the kind of clientele that preferred anonymity. Conversations died as he entered, dozens of eyes tracking his movement as he made his way to the bar. The bartender was a scarred Thorian, whose cybernetic implants glowed softly in the darkness. "You're a long way from home, General," he said in accented Standard Galactic. "I'm looking for someone," Voran replied, placing a credit chip on the bar. "Human male, approximately 2 meters tall, operates under the name Ghostwalker." The bartender's eyes fixed on the credit chip. "Lot of people come through here. Memory ain't what it used to be." Voran added another chip to the first. "Perhaps this will help." "Tall human you said might be you're thinking of Jack. Jack Riker. He's in the back booth, has been for the last 3 hours. Drinking alone, which ain't unusual for his type. Voran turned to scan the tavern's interior, his enhanced vision cutting through the smoke and shadows. There, in a booth that commanded a clear view of both the entrance and the rear exit, sat a figure that matched the descriptions from the intelligence reports. Even seated, the human appeared tall and powerfully built, his movements economical and precise as he lifted a glass to his lips. His clothing was nondescript but clearly of military origin, and Voran could see the telltale bulges that indicated concealed weapons. As the general approached the human, looked up, and Voran found himself meeting a pair of cold blue eyes that seemed to catalog every detail of his appearance and equipment. This was a man who had seen combat, who had survived when others died, who carried himself with the casual confidence of someone accustomed to violence. "Mind if I sit?" Voran asked. "Free galaxy," Riker replied, though his hand remained close to what was probably a sidearm. "Though I should mention that I'm not looking for work at the moment." "What makes you think I'm here to offer you work?" Riker's smile held no warmth. "Imperial General walks into a mercenary bar and makes a beeline for my table. Either you're here to arrest me, which would be stupid, or you need something done that your own people can't handle. Since you're sitting down instead of calling for backup, I'm guessing it's the latter." Voran settled into the booth, noting how Riker shifted slightly to maintain optimal positioning for a quick draw. "You're perceptive. The reports about you don't exaggerate." "What reports would those be?" "Stories from the frontier. A human mercenary who fights like a ghost, strikes like lightning, and vanishes like smoke. Someone who has turned the tide of battles that should have been hopeless." Voran leaned forward slightly. "Someone who might be exactly what the Empire needs right now." "The Empire needs a lot of things," Riker said, taking another sip of his drink. "Most of them involving fundamental changes to how it operates. I'm just one-man general. I'm not in the business of fixing broken governments." "I'm not asking you to fix the government. I'm asking you to help me complete a mission." "What kind of mission?" Voran glanced around the tavern, noting the various species represented among the clientele. None appeared to be paying attention to their conversation, but in a place like this, appearances could be deceiving. "The kind that requires someone with your particular skills. Someone who understands that sometimes the best way to take down a fortress isn't through the front gate." Riker studied him for a long moment. "You're talking about Garkad 7th. The statement hit Voran like a physical blow. "How do you—" "Word travels fast out here, especially when it involves major Imperial military operations. Your queen wants the rebel stronghold taken, and she's given you an impossible timeline to do it." Riker finished his drink and set the glass down with deliberate precision. "What I can't figure out is why you think one human can succeed where an entire army would fail. Because an army would try to fight the rebels on their own terms. You wouldn't." "No," Riker agreed. "I wouldn't. But that still doesn't explain why you're here talking to me instead of assembling the largest force you can manage." Voran made a decision that would either save his career or end his life. "Because there is no army, Riker. Not one that could take Garkad 7 in the time I've been given. The Empire's military is a shadow of what it once was, and the rebels know it. They're counting on us to send wave after wave of troops against their defenses, bleeding ourselves white in the process. So instead, you want to send one man." "I want to send the right man." Riker was quiet for several seconds, his eyes focused on something beyond Voran's shoulder. The general could practically see the human calculating odds, evaluating risks, weighing the potential rewards against almost certain death. It was the look of someone who had spent years making decisions that balanced on the edge between survival and disaster. "What's in it for me?" Riker asked finally. "Apart from a chance to strike a blow against tyranny and oppression?" "I've struck plenty of those blows, General. They don't pay the bills or keep me in ammunition." "Name your price." 5 million credits plus full amnesty for any outstanding warrants in Imperial space. Riker's voice remained level, but Voran caught the slight tension around his eyes. "And transport to human space when the job is done." The sum was staggering, but Voran had anticipated something like this. Done. Just like that? The Empire has deeper pockets than you might think. And if we succeed, 5 million credits will seem like a bargain. Riker leaned back in the booth, studying Voran with new interest. You're either very confident or very desperate. Both, Voran admitted, but mostly desperate. The rebels have to be stopped, Riker. Not because I care about the Empire's territorial integrity, but because if they succeed, millions of innocent people are going to die in the chaos that follows. Innocent people die anyway. That's how empires work. Yes, but not on the scale we're talking about. The rebel leadership isn't interested in reform or independence. They want complete destruction of the imperial system. That means every world, every station, every outpost with imperial ties becomes a target. The death toll will be in the billions. Riker was quiet again, his fingers drumming silently on the table. You're asking me to believe that the Empire is somehow the lesser evil here. I'm asking you to believe that sometimes there are no good choices, only degrees of bad ones. The human stood abruptly, his movement so smooth and controlled that Voran barely registered it, until Riker was already on his feet. I need to think about it. I need an answer now. Then you're out of luck, General. I don't make decisions like this on a whim, especially not when they involve suicidal missions for people I don't trust. Riker tossed a few credits on the table. Give me 24 hours. I don't have 24 hours. Then you'd better find another army. Riker turned and walked toward the tavern's exit, moving through the crowd with the fluid grace of a predator. Voran watched him go, his mind racing through alternatives that didn't exist. The human was right to be cautious. The mission was indeed suicidal, and trusting an alien general he had just met was hardly rational behavior. But as Riker reached the tavern's entrance, chaos erupted. 6 beings in dark clothing burst through the door, their weapons already drawn, and targeting the human. Voran recognized them immediately. Cordanian bounty hunters, probably the most efficient killers in the galaxy. Their leader, a massive reptilian with cybernetic enhancements, raised what looked like a military-grade plasma rifle. Jack Riker, the leader announced in a voice like grinding stone. You're worth more dead than alive. What happened next occurred so quickly that Voran's enhanced reflexes barely managed to track it. Riker seemed to simply flow sideways, his body moving in ways that shouldn't have been possible for someone his size. A knife appeared in his hand, as if materialized from thin air, spinning through the air to bury itself in the throat of the leftmost bounty hunter. The Cordanian leader fired his plasma bolt, scorching the air where Riker had been a fraction of a second earlier. But the human was already moving, diving and rolling behind an overturned table, while drawing a sidearm that had been completely invisible moments before. His return fire was precise and devastating. 3 shots, 3 bounty hunters down. The leader roared in fury and advanced his massive frame, shrugging off a direct hit from Riker's weapon. Cybernetic enhancements glowed beneath his scaled skin as he brought his rifle to bear again, but Riker was no longer where he had expected him to be. The human had somehow circled around through the panicking crowd, using the chaos as cover for a flanking maneuver that brought him up behind the Cordanian. The fight ended with brutal efficiency. Riker's blade found the gap between the bounty hunter's armor plates, and the massive reptilian crashed to the floor with a sound like falling timber. The entire engagement had lasted less than 30 seconds. Silence descended on the tavern as Riker retrieved his knife and surveyed the 6 bodies scattered around the entrance. The other patrons watched him with a mixture of fear and professional appreciation. This was the kind of combat skill that legends were built on. Well, Riker said, holstering his weapon and turning back toward Voran. That settles that. Settles what? Whether I can trust you. The human walked back to their booth, stepping carefully around the spreading pools of blood. You could have warned them I was here, could have set this up as a way to eliminate a potential witness to our conversation. Instead, you sat there looking as surprised as everyone else. Voran realized he was still gripping the edge of the table hard enough to leave marks in the metal. Those were Cordanian bounty hunters, elite killers. Yeah, I noticed. Riker settled back into his seat as if nothing had happened. They've been tracking me for the better part of a year. Something about a contract that went sideways on Beta's Prime. You just killed 6 of the most dangerous predators in the galaxy. I've had practice. Riker signaled the bartender for another drink, apparently unconcerned that the establishment's floor was now littered with corpses. Looks like you've got yourself a one-man army general. The journey back to Vaskthal took 2 days, during which Voran learned more about human military doctrine than he had thought possible. Riker was a former member of something called Force Recon, an elite special operations unit that had apparently specialized in exactly the kind of impossible missions that the Empire now faced. His tactical knowledge was comprehensive, his combat experience extensive, and his understanding of asymmetric warfare far exceeded anything taught in the Imperial military academies. More importantly, he understood the psychological aspects of warfare in ways that Voran had never considered. The rebels weren't just fighting for territory or resources. They were fighting for an idea, a vision of the future that gave their lives meaning. Defeating them would require more than superior firepower. It would require undermining the very foundations of their belief system. The stronghold on Garkad 7 isn't just a military installation, Riker explained, as they reviewed the intelligence reports. It's a symbol. The rebels have turned it into a shrine to their cause, a place where their leaders commune with whatever gods they worship. Taking it isn't enough, you have to destroy it in a way that breaks their faith. And how do you propose to do that? By proving that their leaders are just as fallible as anyone else. By demonstrating that their fortress can be penetrated, their defenders overcome, their commanders defeated. Riker studied the 3-dimensional hologram of the mountain stronghold that dominated their cabin. But it has to be personal. It has to be a confrontation that their followers can understand and remember. A duel, Voran realized. In a manner of speaking, though I suspect it will be considerably more violent than the formal combats your people favor. The ship's communication system chimed, indicating an incoming transmission from Vaskthal. Captain Solin's image appeared in the air before them, her compound eyes reflecting strain and exhaustion. General, she said without preamble, Her Majesty wishes to know the status of your mission. Tell Her Majesty that I have recruited the army she requested, Voran replied carefully. Sir, I'm not detecting any additional life signs aboard your vessel. The army is compact. Solin's antennae twitched in confusion. Sir, could you clarify? Tell the Queen that I will present my army to her upon my return. She may evaluate its capabilities personally before deciding whether to proceed with the mission. Understood, sir. Solin's image flickered and disappeared. Riker had been listening to the exchange with obvious amusement. Army of one, I like it. Though I suspect your queen is going to be somewhat less enthusiastic about the concept. That, Voran said grimly, is what concerns me. They docked at Vaskthal, under cover of darkness, though the perpetual rain made the distinction largely academic. Voran had spent the last few hours of their journey coaching Riker on Imperial protocol and court etiquette, though he suspected the human would ignore most of it when the time came. Humans, he had discovered, had a disturbing tendency to treat authority figures as equals, rather than superiors. The throne room was as he had left it, filled with courtiers, whose primary function seemed to be witnessing the failures of others. But tonight, there was an additional tension in the air, a sense that something momentous was about to occur. Word of the general's return had spread through the palace, along with speculation about the army he had supposedly recruited. The Queen sat upon her throne like a figure carved from living shadow, her 4 arms folded in a gesture that could have indicated either patience or barely contained rage. Her compound eyes tracked Voran's approach, but he could see her attention shift to the human walking beside him. Riker, to his credit, maintained his composure despite being the focus of several hundred alien gazes. He had traded his combat gear for something approaching formal attire, though he had refused to surrender his weapons despite Voran's protests. The general had finally given up the argument, deciding that an armed human was preferable to a dead one. They stopped at the prescribed distance from the throne and performed the ritual genuflection, or rather, Voran performed it, while Riker offered a respectful nod that somehow managed to convey both acknowledgement and equality. The court's collective intake of breath was audible. General Voran, the Queen, said, her voice carrying across the vast chamber. You return to us bearing promises of an army capable of crushing the rebellion. Present this force for our evaluation. Your Majesty, Voran, replied, his voice steady despite the thundering of his hearts. May I present Jack Riker, formerly of the Human Forces, currently operating as an independent military contractor. The silence that followed was deafening. Voran could feel the weight of 100 stares, could sense the collective disbelief of the assembled nobles. The Queen herself remained motionless for several seconds, her compound eyes fixed on the human standing beside him. One human, she said finally. Yes, Your Majesty. You bring us one human and call it an army. I bring you a specialist capable of accomplishing what an army cannot. The Queen's mandibles clicked a sound that, in another context, might have indicated amusement, but here carried overtones of menace. Explain. Voran took a breath and committed himself to a course of action that would either vindicate his judgment or result in his immediate execution. Your Majesty requested an army capable of taking Garkad 7th. Traditional military doctrine would suggest a force of at least 10,000 troops supported by artillery and air cover. Such a force would require months to assemble and train, and would suffer massive casualties in a frontal assault against the rebel defenses. Continue. Mr. Riker represents an alternative approach. His expertise lies in unconventional warfare, in achieving objectives through stealth and precision rather than overwhelming force. He has successfully completed missions that conventional armies could not even attempt. The Queen rose from her throne, her massive form casting shadows across the assembled court. You would have us trust the fate of the Empire to a single alien mercenary. I would have you trust it to the right tool for the job, Your Majesty. For a moment, Voran thought the Queen might order their immediate execution. Her claws extended gleaming in the bioluminescent light, while her mandibles spread wide in a display of aggression that sent most of the courtiers scrambling for the exits. But then, she seemed to consider his words, her head tilting slightly, as she studied Riker with new interest. Human, she said, addressing Riker directly for the first time. What do you say to this? Do you believe yourself capable of succeeding where armies would fail? Riker met her gaze without flinching. I believe that the right person in the right place can accomplish things that no amount of conventional force can achieve. Whether I'm the right person remains to be seen. Modest. How refreshing. The Queen descended from her throne, her movements fluid despite her size. Tell me, human, what makes you think you can succeed against enemies who have defeated our finest military units? Because I don't think like your finest military units, Riker replied. Your people fight according to rules, protocols, traditions, established doctrines. The rebels have abandoned those rules, which gives them an advantage. But I never followed your rules to begin with. Interesting. And how would you propose to take a mountain fortress defended by fanatics? By not trying to take it at all. By finding the one person whose death would cause the entire structure to collapse, and eliminating that person. The Queen's compound eyes glittered. Assassination. Strategic elimination of enemy leadership, Riker corrected. Though I suppose the distinction is largely semantic. Indeed. The Queen circled him slowly, her claws clicking against the polished floor. General Voran speaks highly of your combat skills. Perhaps a demonstration would be appropriate. Voran's heart skipped a beat. Your Majesty. Summon the palace guard, the Queen commanded. 5 of our finest warriors. Let us see if this human army of yours is worth the risk. The next few minutes passed in a blur of activity, as court functionaries scurried to obey the Queen's command. 5 of the palace's elite guards entered the throne room, their ceremonial armor gleaming and their weapons ready. These were not academy graduates, but veteran soldiers, beings who had survived actual combat and earned their positions through skill rather than political connections. A circle was cleared in the center of the throne room, with the assembled courtiers forming a living amphitheater around its edges. The Queen settled back onto her throne, her 4 arms spread wide in anticipation. Voran found himself holding his breath as Riker stepped into the circle, apparently unconcerned that he was outnumbered 5-1. "Standard combat protocols apply," the Queen announced. "First blood determines victory." The palace guards spread out around the circle's perimeter, their movements coordinated and professional. They were taking no chances with the human treating him as a serious threat, rather than an amusing diversion. Voran felt a flicker of hope. If they underestimated Riker, he might actually survive this demonstration. "Begin," the Queen commanded. What followed was less a fight than a masterclass in human military efficiency. Riker moved like liquid lightning, his actions flowing from one to the next without pause or hesitation. The first guard went down to a precise strike, to a nerve cluster, his weapon clattering across the floor as his arm went numb. The second managed to land a glancing blow with his sword before Riker's counterattack sent him sprawling. The remaining 3 guards attacked simultaneously, their coordination nearly perfect as they sought to overwhelm their opponent through superior numbers. But Riker seemed to anticipate their movements, flowing between their attacks like water through a sieve. His counterstrikes were surgical in their precision, targeting joints and pressure points with devastating effect. The fight ended with all 5 guards on the ground groaning, but alive. Riker stood in the center of the circle, barely breathing hard, his clothes torn, but his body unmarked. The throne room was absolutely silent, except for the ever-present sound of rain against the windows. "Impressive," the Queen said finally, "though I notice you refrained from lethal force." "You said first blood, Your Majesty. I saw no need to kill warriors who were simply following orders. Pragmatic as well as skilled. How unusual." The Queen's mandibles clicked in what might have been approval. "Very well, General Voran. Your army has proven its worth in single combat. But Garkad 7 will present challenges that cannot be solved through individual prowess alone. Which is why I don't intend to face them alone," Riker said. "I'll need a small team of specialist equipment appropriate to the mission, and most importantly, accurate intelligence about the target." "What sort of specialists?" "A communications expert, an engineer capable of dealing with advanced security systems, and someone familiar with the local terrain. 3 people maximum, any more would compromise operational security." The Queen considered this for several seconds. "General Voran will select the team members and provide whatever equipment you require. Captain Solon will brief you on the intelligence situation." She paused, her compound eyes fixed on Riker. "But understand this, human. You have accepted responsibility, not just for a military mission, but for the future of this empire. Succeed, and you will be rewarded beyond your imagination. Fail, and your death will serve as an example to others who might consider disappointing me." "Understood, Your Majesty." "Excellent. You have 12 days remaining. Use them wisely." The next week passed in a blur of preparation and planning. Voran assembled a team according to Riker's specifications. Chief Engineer Borna, a technical specialist capable of bypassing the most sophisticated security systems. Communications Officer Vex, whose cybernetic implants allowed him to interface directly with electronic networks. And Scout Ranger Kess, who had grown up on a world similar to Garkad 7 and understood mountain warfare better than anyone else in the Imperial military. Riker worked with each team member, individually evaluating their capabilities and integrating them into his operational plan. It quickly became apparent that the humans' approach to military operations was fundamentally different from anything the Imperial forces had previously encountered. Where they favored overwhelming force and frontal assault, He emphasized stealth precision and psychological warfare. "The rebels expect an army," he explained, during one of their planning sessions. "They've prepared their defenses accordingly, overlapping fields of fire, redundant communication systems, multiple fallback positions, all designed to channel attacking forces into predetermined kill zones." "So how do we avoid those kill zones?" Engineer Borna asked. "By not attacking at all. At least not in any way they'll recognize as an attack." Riker activated a holographic display, showing the mountain stronghold in 3 dimensions. Intelligence reports indicate that the fortress is built around a natural cave system that extends deep into the mountain. The rebels have expanded and fortified these caves, but they've also created a vulnerability. He highlighted a section of the display, showing a series of narrow passages that wound through the mountain's interior. These are the old mining tunnels abandoned for centuries, but still structurally sound. They connect to the main cave system about 2 kilometers below the current defensive perimeter. "You want to infiltrate through tunnels that haven't been used for centuries?" Ranger Kess's voice carried a note of skepticism. "I want to appear where the enemy least expects us. The rebel leadership will be concentrated in the main command center, probably the most heavily defended part of the entire complex. But if we can reach them directly, without fighting through their outer defenses—" "You're talking about decapitation strike," Varan realized. "Remove the leadership and let the organization collapse on its own." "Exactly. But it has to be public visible to their followers. If we simply assassinate their leaders quietly, they'll become martyrs, and the rebellion will continue under new management. We need to demonstrate that their cause is hopeless, that their leaders are mortal, that resistance is futile." Communications Officer Vex leaned forward, his cybernetic implants glowing softly. "The psychological impact could be significant, but it requires perfect timing and flawless execution. One mistake and we'll be trapped in the heart of enemy territory with no hope of extraction." "That's why we're not planning to extract," Riker said quietly. The room fell silent as the implications of his statement sank in. Varan felt his compound eyes narrow as he studied the human's expression. "You're planning a suicide mission." "I'm planning a mission with a very low probability of survival," Riker corrected. "There's a difference. Suicide missions are undertaken by people who want to die. I very much want to live, but I'm willing to accept the risks, because the alternative, allowing the rebellion to continue, will result in far more deaths than our own." "The Queen expects you to return," Varan pointed out. "The Queen expects me to succeed. Whether I return is secondary to that objective." Engineer Borna's mandibles clicked nervously. "If the mission is truly one way, why should the rest of us participate? What do we gain from certain death?" Riker met each of their gazes in turn. "Because sometimes dying for something is better than living for nothing. Because if we succeed, millions of people will continue to live in relative peace and security. Because the alternative is watching the galaxy burn while we stand safely on the sidelines." "Pretty words," Vex said, "but they don't change the mathematics of the situation." "No, they don't. Which is why I'm not ordering any of you to come with me. This is entirely voluntary. Anyone who wants out can leave now. No questions asked, no consequences." The silence stretched for several minutes as each team member considered their options. Voran found himself thinking about Kellen Prime, about the 3 million people who had died, because he had been too rigid in his thinking, too committed to traditional approaches. Here was a chance to prevent an even greater tragedy, but only if he was willing to abandon everything he had been taught about military command. "I'm in," he said finally. The others looked at him in surprise. "General," Borna's voice carried a note of confusion. "I'm in," Varan repeated. "The Queen ordered me to take Garkad 7th. She didn't specify that I had to survive the process." One by one, the others nodded their agreement. Perhaps it was loyalty. Perhaps it was professional pride. Perhaps it was simply the realization that some causes were worth dying for. Whatever the reason, they were committed. The remaining days passed quickly as they finalized their preparations. Riker insisted on specialized equipment stealth suits, capable of defeating most sensor systems, weapons optimized for close-quarters combat, and communication devices that could function in high-radiation environments. The Queen, true to her word, provided everything he requested without question or complaint. On the final day before their departure, Vorin found himself standing once again on the palace balcony, watching the eternal rain cascade down the towers of the military academy. The cadets were still drilling, still performing their elaborate ceremonial maneuvers, still preparing for battles that would never come. In 12 hours, he would be gone, probably forever, and they would continue their meaningless dance until the Empire finally collapsed around them. Having second thoughts, Riker's voice came from behind him. Voran turned to find the human approaching, dressed in the black stealth suit that would hopefully keep him alive for the next few days. No second thoughts, but I find myself wondering what legacy we leave behind. Does it matter? To me, yes. I've spent my entire life serving this empire, fighting its wars, upholding its values. If we succeed tomorrow, I'll have validated everything I've ever believed. If we fail, you'll be dead, which means it won't be your problem anymore. Riker joined him at the balcony's edge, his blue eyes reflecting the light from the bioluminescent strips. Legacy is for people who survive to worry about it. Spoken like a true mercenary. Spoken like someone who's learned not to waste time on things he can't control. Riker was quiet for a moment, watching the rain. Though, if it helps, I think what we're doing matters. Not for the Empire, not for the rebellion, but for all the people caught in between. The innocents. The ones who just want to live their lives without being shot at by fanatics on either side. They stood in comfortable silence for several minutes, two soldiers from different worlds united by a common purpose. Tomorrow they would infiltrate an impregnable fortress, face overwhelming odds, and probably die in the attempt. But tonight, they were simply two beings watching the rain and contemplating the strange turns that life could take. "Time to go," Riker said finally. "The transport is ready." The journey to Garcade 7 took 6 hours, during which the team made final equipment checks and reviewed their operational plan one last time. The planet itself was a harsh world of towering mountains and deep valleys, its surface scarred by centuries of mining operations. The rebel stronghold was located in the highest peak of the main mountain range, its position carefully chosen to maximize defensive advantages while minimizing approach routes. Their transport dropped them at a landing site 50 kilometers from the target, far enough away to avoid detection, but close enough to reach the infiltration point within a reasonable time frame. The landscape was as brutal as the intelligence reports had indicated: jagged rocks, treacherous footing, and an atmosphere thin enough to require supplemental oxygen. Riker set a punishing pace as they made their way toward the abandoned mining tunnels. His enhanced physiology allowed him to operate efficiently in the low-oxygen environment, but his alien teammates struggled despite their environmental suits. Still, none of them complained or asked him to slow down. They all understood that time was their enemy as much as the rebels. The entrance to the mining tunnels was concealed behind a rockfall that appeared natural but showed signs of deliberate placement. Engineer Borna made quick work of the obstacles, using shaped charges to create an opening large enough for them to squeeze through. Beyond lay a network of passages that descended deep into the mountain's heart. "From here on, we operate under total communication silence," Riker whispered as they prepared to enter the tunnels. "Any transmission could be detected and compromise the mission. We proceed according to the planned route, and if we encounter resistance, we deal with it quietly." The journey through the abandoned mines was a nightmare of claustrophobic passages and unstable supports. More than once, they were forced to crawl through openings, barely large enough to accommodate their equipment, while loose rocks threatened to trigger cave-ins that would trap them permanently. But Riker's navigation was flawless, his human intuition somehow guiding them through a maze that had been carved centuries before any of them were born. After 4 hours of crawling, climbing, and occasionally rappelling down vertical shafts, they finally reached their objective, a junction point, where the old mining tunnels connected to the natural cave system that housed the rebel stronghold. Intelligence had been accurate about the location, but nothing had prepared them for the scale of the operation they discovered. The caves had been transformed into an underground city, with passages carved out to accommodate thousands of inhabitants. Artificial lighting illuminated a network of chambers that served as barracks, workshops, command centers, and storage facilities. The rebels had created a self-sufficient fortress that could theoretically withstand a siege of years. But they had also created a vulnerability. The very size of their operation made it impossible to guard every passage monitor, every corridor secure every chamber. They had focused their security on the main entrances, leaving the deeper levels relatively unprotected. It was exactly the kind of overconfidence that Riker had been counting on. They made their way through the lower levels, using maintenance passages and service tunnels, avoiding the main thoroughfares, where they might encounter patrols. Communications Officer Vex's cybernetic implants proved invaluable, allowing him to tap into the facility's internal network and map the locations of security sensors and automated systems. The Rebel Command Center was located in the heart of the complex, a natural chamber that had been expanded and reinforced to serve as the organization's nerve center. According to the intelligence gathered by Vex, it was currently occupied by the entire Rebel leadership, a dozen individuals whose deaths would effectively decapitate the movement. "Perfect timing," Riker whispered as they reached an observation point overlooking the command center. "They're all here for some kind of strategic planning session." Through the transparent aluminum viewing port, they could see the rebel leaders gathered around a holographic display showing Imperial military positions throughout the sector. The meeting appeared to be reaching its climax, with several participants gesturing animatedly as they discussed their next moves. "The primary target is Warlord Zarek," Varan whispered, indicating a massive figure whose cybernetic enhancements gleamed in the chamber's lighting. "He's the one who unified the various rebel factions. Remove him, and the alliance falls apart." "I see him," Riker confirmed. "Big, ugly lots of artificial parts. Should be easy enough to identify in the chaos." "What chaos?" Engineer Borna asked. Riker's smile was predatory. "The chaos we're about to create." The plan was elegantly simple. Vex would use his cybernetic interface to disable the chamber's security systems, while Borna planted explosive charges at strategic points throughout the facility. Ranger Kess would secure their escape route, and Varan would provide tactical coordination. Riker himself would enter the command center and eliminate the rebel leadership. It sounded straightforward, but they all knew that plans rarely survived contact with the enemy. The moment they revealed their presence, the entire stronghold would mobilize against them. They would have perhaps 10 minutes to complete their objectives before overwhelming force made escape impossible. "Remember," Riker said as they prepared to separate, "the goal isn't to fight our way out. The goal is to complete the mission. Everything else is secondary." The assault began with Vex's electronic attack on the facility's systems. Lights flickered throughout the complex as he seized control of the main computer network, overriding security protocols and plunging entire sections into darkness. Emergency alarms began sounding as automated systems detected the intrusion, but by then, it was too late to prevent it. Borna moved with mechanical precision, placing his charges at critical structural points that would bring down key sections of the stronghold. The explosives were set on a timer that would give them time to complete their primary objective before the facility began collapsing around them. Riker made his entrance into the command center through a ventilation shaft that Vex had identified as unmonitored. He dropped silently into the chamber, just as the rebel leaders began responding to the security alerts. His appearance so sudden and unexpected that several seconds passed before anyone noticed him. Warlord Zarek was the first to react his cybernetic enhancements, allowing him to move with inhuman speed as he drew a weapon and brought it to bear on the intruder. But Riker was already moving his own enhanced reflexes, carrying him into close quarters, where the warlord's rifle became a liability rather than an asset. The fight that followed was brief but brutal. Zarek was physically powerful and extensively augmented, but his cybernetics made him predictable. His responses were programmed, optimized for efficiency rather than adaptability. Riker fought like a force of nature, his movements flowing, and unpredictable, his attacks targeting the weak points in the Warlord's artificial systems. The decisive moment came when Riker managed to get behind the Warlord and drive his combat knife into the junction between organic tissue and cybernetic implant. Zarek's entire left side went dead as his neural interface was severed, and he collapsed like a fallen tree. The other rebel leaders tried to flee, but the chamber's exits had been sealed by Vex's electronic sabotage. They died quickly, efficiently, without fanfare or ceremony. Within 3 minutes of entering the command center, Riker had eliminated the entire rebel leadership. But the mission was far from over. Alarms were blaring throughout the complex as security forces rushed toward the command center. Voran's voice crackled through Riker's communicator, reporting that rebel troops were converging on their position from multiple directions. "Time to go," Riker said, though he knew that escape was probably impossible. They had succeeded in their primary objective, but the cost was going to be their lives. He fought his way out of the command center using skills learned in a dozen different wars, on a dozen different worlds. The rebels were numerous and determined, but they lacked coordination in the wake of their leaders' deaths. Their response was chaotic, emotional, driven by rage rather than tactical thinking. Riker linked up with Voran in a service corridor 50 meters from the command center. The general's armor was scorched and dented, evidence of the running battle he had fought to reach the rendezvous point. "Status?" Riker asked. "Borna's charges are set. Vex is holding the escape route, but barely. Kess is—" Voran paused, his compound eyes, reflecting something that might have been grief. "Kess didn't make it. The Ranger's death was a blow, but not an unexpected one. They had all known the odds when they volunteered for this mission." "Can we reach the extraction point?" "Unknown. The rebels have sealed most of the passages leading to the lower levels. We'll have to fight our way through." They fought. For the next 20 minutes, they battled through corridors filled with desperate defenders who knew that their cause was lost but refused to surrender. Riker's ammunition ran low, then ran out entirely, forcing him to rely on salvaged weapons and improvised tactics. Voran's armor absorbed hit after hit, its systems gradually failing under the sustained assault. They reached the junction point just as Borna's charges detonated. The explosions sent shockwaves through the mountain, bringing down entire sections of the stronghold and entombing hundreds of rebels beneath tons of rock. Emergency lighting failed throughout the complex, plunging most of the passages into absolute darkness. Engineer Borna was waiting for them at the entrance to the mining tunnels, his equipment pack open and his demo charges spent. "All set," he reported. "The main power core will overload in approximately 8 minutes. When it does, this entire mountain is going to become significantly shorter." "Then we'd better not be here when that happens," Riker said. The journey back through the mining tunnels was a nightmare of collapsing passages and unstable supports. The explosions had weakened structures that were already centuries old, and several times they were forced to find alternate routes when their planned escape path proved impassable. Communications Officer Vex's cybernetic systems were failing, damaged by the electromagnetic pulse from the explosions. He stumbled frequently, his artificial reflexes no longer properly coordinated with his organic nervous system. But he refused to be left behind, forcing his damaged body forward through sheer determination. They reached the external entrance just as the final explosion tore through the mountain's heart. The entire peak collapsed in on itself, creating a crater where the rebel stronghold had once stood. The psychological impact was even greater than the physical destruction. An organization that had seemed invincible had been eliminated in a single night by 5 individuals. The extraction point was 2 kilometers away across terrain that offered no cover from aerial surveillance. But the rebel forces were in complete disarray, leaderless, and demoralized by the destruction of their stronghold. The few pursuit groups that managed to organize themselves were easily evaded or eliminated by the surviving team members. Their transport was waiting exactly where it was supposed to be, its pilot, maintaining station, despite the obvious risks. The journey back to Vaskthal passed in exhausted silence, each survivor lost in their own thoughts about what they had accomplished and what it had cost. The throne room was packed when they arrived, word of their success having spread throughout the palace. The queen sat upon her throne like a figure of judgment, her compound eyes reflecting satisfaction and perhaps a trace of surprise. She had expected success, but perhaps not survival. "General Voran," she said as they approached, "Captain Solon has briefed me on the situation at Garkid 7. It appears that your unconventional army has exceeded even my expectations." "The mission was successful, Your Majesty," Voran replied. "The rebel leadership has been eliminated and their stronghold destroyed. Intelligence reports suggest that the various rebel factions are already turning on each other in the absence of unified command. And the cost? 1 dead, 3 wounded, 1 human mercenary who has fulfilled his contract with distinction." The queen's gaze shifted to Riker, who had remained silent throughout the exchange. "Human, you have served our empire well. Name your reward." "I already named it, Your Majesty. 5 million credits and safe passage to human space." "Of course. Though it occurs to me that a warrior of your caliber might find more profitable employment in our service on a permanent basis." Riker was quiet for several seconds, his blue eyes studying the alien monarch with obvious interest. "What did you have in mind?" "A position of command. Joint authority with General Voran to rebuild our military forces according to the principles you have demonstrated. The Empire requires adaptation if it is to survive, and you have shown us what adaptation looks like. You're offering me a job training alien soldiers. I am offering you the opportunity to create something new, a force that combines the best of our traditional discipline with your innovative tactics. A military organization based on merit rather than birth, on effectiveness rather than ceremony." Voran felt his compound eyes widen in surprise. The Queen was proposing fundamental changes to the Empire's military structure, changes that would challenge centuries of tradition and custom. It was exactly the kind of reform that the situation required, but he had never expected her to embrace it so readily. "What about the court?" Riker asked, indicating the assembled nobles with a slight gesture. "I get the impression that not everyone is enthusiastic about change." "The court will adapt or be replaced," the Queen replied, her voice carrying unmistakable authority. "The rebellion has demonstrated the cost of maintaining an ineffective military. Those who value tradition over survival are welcome to find new employment elsewhere." "In that case," Riker said slowly, "I accept your offer, on the condition that I maintain operational autonomy and the authority to recruit personnel based on ability rather than political connections." "Granted." The Queen rose from her throne, her massive form casting shadows across the assembled courtiers. "Let it be recorded that Jack Riker, the human who comprised an army of 1, is hereby appointed to joint command of the Imperial military forces. Let it also be recorded that the old ways have failed, and that our survival depends on embracing new ones." The formal ceremony that followed was a blend of ancient tradition and improvised innovation. Riker was sworn into service using words that had been spoken for centuries, but the meaning behind them was entirely new. He was not just accepting a military commission, he was becoming the catalyst for the Empire's transformation. As they stood together before the assembled nobles, Voran found himself thinking about legacy once again. The Empire that emerged from this crisis would be fundamentally different from the one that had entered it. The rigid hierarchies, the ceremonial traditions, the emphasis on form over function, all of it would have to change if they were to survive in a galaxy that had no patience for weakness. But perhaps that was not such a bad thing. Perhaps it was time for something new, something better. Perhaps an empire built on merit, rather than birthright, would be stronger than what had come before. Outside the palace windows, the rain continued to fall, just as it had for centuries. But for the first time in years, Voron found himself looking forward to tomorrow. The first training session began at dawn just as the outline had promised. A mixed group of species stood in formation on the parade ground, their ranks including both academy graduates and street fighters, nobles, and commoners, veterans and recruits. What they shared was not heritage or social standing, but a willingness to learn and a commitment to excellence. Riker stood before them in simple combat fatigues, his human appearance incongruous among the assembled aliens, but his authority unquestioned. Beside him, Voron watched with compound eyes that reflected both pride and anticipation. They had done more than complete an impossible mission. They had begun the transformation of an empire. "We're going to start with the basics," Riker announced, his voice carrying across the parade ground. "Forget everything you think you know about warfare. Forget your traditions, your ceremonies, your elaborate protocols. We're going to build something new, something that works, something that keeps you alive when the shooting starts." The sun rose higher, burning away the morning mist and illuminating a scene that would have been impossible just weeks before. Aliens and humans training together, learning from each other, building the foundation of a military force based not on birthright, but on merit. It was the beginning of a new era born from the courage of 5 individuals who had been willing to risk everything for a chance at something better. And in the distance, barely visible through the perpetual rain, the ruins of Garkad VII served as a reminder that sometimes the greatest victories came not from overwhelming force, but from the determination of those who refused to accept defeat. The one-man army had become something larger, a symbol of possibility, a catalyst for change, a bridge between what was and what could be. The empire would survive, would thrive, would transform itself into something worthy of the loyalty it demanded. And it would do so because sometimes, just sometimes, one determined individual really could change the world.